public with us. Do we have any public with us at this point?
I'm gonna look and just see, I don't see anybody in the waiting room right now. I don't see any phone, like anybody who's called in for public comment. Once Celeste gets it up and running on YouTube, Celeste, do you want to just make a note and see if there's anybody who has any questions or any comments there that you can relay to her?
So there's nothing yet. We just were recording and we're live on YouTube now. So anybody that makes a comment on YouTube, I will email to her or I'll put them in the chat.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
Good. It's, I think, 6:33. I'll call the meeting to order. And just to make sure there's no public that we aren't aware of but is listening in, is there any public comment? And for those of you who are on YouTube, we have a public comment period now, and we also have one toward the end of the meeting. And so you haven't lost your only chance if you don't have anything to say now. Dick, would you mind reviewing the norms for us?
As a board, we will make sure all our students are our first priority. We will honor the distinction between governance and administrative responsibilities. We will set ends policies, executive limitations policies, board management delegation policies, and governance policies, and measure our performance against these policies. We will set goals for our work that are SMART, specific, measurable, attainable, results-oriented, and time-bound. And we will periodically check in on these goals. We will conduct ourselves in a courteous and professional manner. This means we will respect time, follow protocol, speak to the point, be prepared, bring closure to open items. We will make fact-based decisions that are in the best interests of our stakeholders. We will clearly and effectively communicate with all of our stakeholders.
Thank you, Dick. The first item on the agenda after that is the consent agenda, which has two items. One is the minutes from September, and the other is a hiring decision.
So moved.
Okay, moved by Dick to pass the consent agenda. Is there a second?
Lindsay.
Okay, seconded by Lindsay. So moved by Dick, seconded by Lindsay to pass the consent agenda. Remember, if you do want to discuss something, then you need to vote against passing the consent agenda. Otherwise, we go on to the next item. All those in favor of passing the consent agenda, please raise your hand. And anybody opposed, could you please raise your hand? I'm not sure about abstentions, but I see no nay votes, so the consent agenda is adopted. And we go on to ends and focus on learning. And the first item there is a school goal presentation, I believe.
Yes. So as you can see, we are privileged to have our principals and Director of Teaching and Learning, Skylar LeBombard, on with us this evening. We had talked about, originally we had wanted to have a gold presentation for you in August, and I had requested that we postpone that and allow our leaders to focus on getting their schools ready to open. So we appreciate that. And now that we're sort of through the first section of time, everyone is beginning to focus a little bit more on kind of teaching and learning and where we're heading this year. So I am going to share my screen in a moment, and I'm going to facilitate a PowerPoint presentation. What we are going to do is go through the entire thing. We're going to start with Skylar, and then we're going to go through all 5 schools. I'm going to ask that board members, if you can take notes, if you have any questions or anything that jumps out at you as school that you might want to ask about when we're done, that you just capture your thoughts and ideas and notes so that we can get through and then have some space for a discussion at the end. So folks, I'm going to remind our principals and Skylar that we are working to keep this at 5 minutes per school. And I have, as I've shared with everyone presenting, I am going to be a little bit tight on this, and so please don't be offended. But I'm going to set a timer for 4 minutes, which will go off when you hit the 4-minute mark. I'll stop it pretty quickly, but that way you'll know you've got to start wrapping things up. This is, probably interesting and may generate some good conversation, but we also, I believe, don't want to spend the rest of the evening here. So I'm going to share my screen, and unless anybody has a question about that process for us. Okay. Okay. I just was looking at my notes to make sure I had everything. Sorry. Here we go. So when you're presenting, just let me know if you want me to jump ahead, transition to the next screen. Okay.
You got it.
Sorry, I'm not sure why that didn't just. I think everything is very slow for my screen right now. What just happened? Hold on. There we go. All right. Is this big in the middle of your screen too?
Yeah.
Okay. Are we good? Can you see this clearly on your end?
Oh, now we can. Yeah, there is a little bit of a lag, but we'll be all right
Okay.
as long as I can reclaim my time.
I haven't started the timer yet.
All right. Sounds good. All right. So as Randy had indicated, these are our BRSU school goals. Some of them are going to be tied to CIP goals, which are a requirement that the AOE has for us to access federal dollars. So I'll start with the larger organization, and then I will be followed up by my building level colleagues, and they'll give an overview of their goals that are somewhat connected or may not be connected because they may have elected to go a different route. So the BRSU overall organizational goals are in 2 domains of our educator quality standards. They're in academic proficiency and safe and healthy schools. And the bullets that you see below are kind of the sum, or the parts to the sum of academic proficiency and the parts to the sum of safe and healthy schools. In previous years, we have had personalization as a goal, but this year, just given its, I guess, unusual nature, we've pared it down to 2 goals, and they are required in these areas. Every school in the state of Vermont has to have an academic proficiency goal and a safe and healthy school goal for continuous improvement purposes. So here is our wordy goal. By the end of the 2020-2021 school year, comprehensive computer adaptive assessment data, so iReady in this case, previously we had been using MAPS, will indicate the consistent implementation of BRSU supported curriculum and instructional models leads to continuous learner growth, as evidenced by 65% of students representing historically marginalized groups achieving grade level average growth in the areas of reading and mathematics. It's a really wordy way to say that our computer adaptive assessments, usually they're nationally normed. So they shoot for about 50% of students hitting their average growth for any particular age. I think it's by biological age. So setting a goal at 65% is actually quite ambitious, where you might think 65% isn't that ambitious. Right now, these numbers are, for our overall student body, are around 45 to 55% reach that goal area. For our historically marginalized groups, so I can further define that as well, that's going to be so low socioeconomic status, that's going to be any kind of racial data that we have. It's really easy to do for the SU because our N size is much larger and we can have an actual population to work with, whereas some of our school level data for historically marginalized groups is really small. Slide, please. So here are some things that we're going to do to address and achieve this goal. So we're really paying attention to our new teacher orientation and mentoring systems this year. This has been kind of interesting because there's been a lot of onboarding, getting people familiar with the systems that we're using to even deliver our education right now. So we have instructional coaches that are working on all of these things with our teachers, as well, our veteran teachers, as well as our newer teachers. We've adopted the iReady instruction piece, which is different than the iReady diagnostic testing system. So it will give our kids a personalized learning path that is generated based on their results on the diagnostic assessment, which they're currently doing this week and the next 2 after this as well. So our safe and healthy school goal is related to physical environment. It's related to disciplinary data, multi-tiered system of supports. So you can see that we're looking for a 10% reduction of significant incidents reportable to state, and we're going to achieve that through a BRSU district level team with representation from every school. Slide, please. And this is interesting because we don't necessarily have great data from last year, given that our schools were physically closed from March to June. So that how do we get behavioral data when kids are at a distance other than behavior on virtual learning platforms? So we are focusing this year, as you are all well aware, on relationship safety and trust and establishing those communities at a distance and also in person. So second step is a program that teaches social emotional skills. And we have that present in all of our buildings. The SEL stands for social emotional learning, and PBIS is positive behavioral interventions and supports, teams in every building, a representative of which would be on a larger BRSU team. We're going to take a look at a deep dive into the overall PBIS data that we collect as an organization for all 6 of our schools. Responsive classroom is something that is present in our buildings, as well as developmental design, I know, is a goal area for a lot of our middle school principals. And we're also, as you are all aware, we're really focused on equity this year and understanding how to meet the needs of all of our students. That's.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Tyler.
You're welcome.
So hi there, I'm Carolyn Perillo. I'm the principal for Courier Memorial School. And we too have 2 overarching goals, one in the area of academic proficiency and the other one for safe and healthy schools. For academic proficiency, we're looking for a 10% increase in the number of students scoring at grade level in the area of reading for grades 1 and 2. Next slide. When we went through the process called the root cause analysis and looking at our data to identify the areas that we need to focus on, mostly for our school, clearly we are a high poverty community. And what we know about students that come from high poverty homes is that often many of them, they start their school experience with pretty substantial language skill deficits. And as you can see before, just as one example, that research shows that children from high poverty homes are exposed to about 13 million words by age 4, whereas children from professional households are exposed to 45 million words by age 4. And what we know overall is that there's a direct correlation between success with reading and overall success with life. Next slide. So what does this mean in the action steps that we will put in place? We will continue to develop mini goals where we will do the plan, do, study, act, which we develop the goal, we put it into action, we evaluate it and adjust it as needed.
Sorry.
That's okay. Trigger finger over there. And we want to build a comprehensive local assessment plan for literacy that's more specific for our school. We want to continue with our professional development in the science of reading. Last year, we had 10 professional staff, myself included, that engaged in a 3-credit course that was offered through Castleton that was developed by Mindplay that was specifically on the science of reading. And we were all engaged in that work and meeting at least monthly to be able to help utilize the new learning that we had when things kind of fell apart. So our goal, we've all completed that course at this point. So we want to be able to put together a literacy committee for this school year so we can take our new learning, continue our learning, and develop some very specific building-based goals. The second area is our safe and healthy schools. And we're looking at 10% reduction of discipline referrals, as well as significant incidents reportable to the state. Those significant incidents, for example, would be related to bullying, harassment, or any behavior that resulted in a suspension. And what does this mean? We want to engage in professional development to increase our knowledge on best practices for supporting students from economically disadvantaged homes. We were all tasked with really focusing on marginalized groups, and what we want to really focus on is our high poverty homes and what we can do to best support them. When our building-based leadership team did our own research as a starting point last year, what we've identified is that utilizing brain-based practices is a best practice for kids that come from high poverty homes or have chronic trauma backgrounds. And we also have high hopes to engage in a school-wide book read of Teaching with Poverty in Mind by Eric Jensen. We will do that if the timing is right, but it's a really good read, and it's going to be important information for us to be able to digest together. So I want to make certain that the timing is right and that we're ready to absorb that in a way that will really benefit from it. And then also, as part of our overarching goal that is connected to our continuous improvement plan, we do have a full-time social emotional interventionist that helps support our overall needs at school and helps to support to implement our behavioral and social emotional goals.
Thanks, Carolyn.
Hi, I'm Rosanna Moran, principal at the Dorset School. And we also have chosen goals in the area of academic proficiency and social emotional learning. In terms of our academic proficiency goal, by the end of 2020-21, the iReady data for the Dorset School will show a 15% improvement from this fall, so what we're taking right now, to spring of 21, in the percentage of students meeting proficiency in foundational skills in math and reading. This will be accomplished by continued staff professional development on writing clear learning targets, as well as plans for progress monitoring student acquisition of foundational skills. When we talk about the foundational skills in language arts, we're talking about vocabulary, key ideas, and details. And in math, we're talking about numbers and operations, from the primary grades knowing their numbers to operations in algebra and measurement and data in all grades. And we found that our scores in those areas varied widely. Some grade levels did very, very well. In ELA, based on the maps from January, 90% of our students in grade 2 were average or above. In grade 7, it was only 52% in ELA. In math, 80% of our students in grade 1, average and above, 60% in grade 8. And there was really quite a variation as you went through each grade level. So what we're looking at is the focus on personalization and to personalize learning paths for each student to address their lagging skills, those gaps that they have, or students who have acquired that and the need for enrichment. And iReady does a wonderful job with forming that personalized path for students. In terms of targeted lessons, then taking that information we get from that and to group the students flexibly for the acquisition of lagging skills, or wherever they happen to be along those learning scales, which we worked with Bill Rich last year on developing learning scales, so that instead of just a beginning, developing, proficient, we really stretch that out more with specific skills. We're looking at the curriculum to ensure vertical alignment of local assessments. We have all done, starting last year, Haggerty for phonemic awareness in the primary grades, foundations for phonics, and framing your thoughts for really breaking down the writing process. And the progress monitoring is the piece that I'm most excited about, because that's something that we really have never had a universal tool to do that. Teachers had their own form of progress monitoring, meaning looking at a child week to week and how are they doing, instead of waiting for the next big assessment, looking how they're doing as they're going along. And the iReady does provide that availability of progress monitoring, which is great. We can look at the next slide. Our second goal was with the social and emotional learning. And we found that particularly in our middle school, we were dealing with a lack of consistency and lots of low-level disrespectful incidents. Not so much the major things that would be dealt with individually, but that low-level disrespect from students toward each other as well as toward the adults. So our goal is that we will improve the culture and climate of the middle school. Specifically, students treat adults with respect and students treat each other with respect, which was one of the questions on the Swiss data from PBIS, the survey that we gave the students. And this will be measured by an increase in the percentage of students who report students treating adults and each other with respect from the current last year, 40% to 65% on that Swiss survey, and a 10% reduction of the monthly behavior tracking forms from the 2019-20 school year to the current school year in the area of disrespect. And next slide. So what we're looking at for action steps on that, our middle school entire team attended a wonderful workshop on relationships and belonging with restorative practices, and to have consistent use and reinforcement from one teacher to the next in the middle school in terms of their standard operating procedures. So every major activity that the students are doing is broken down into when you come into the classroom, first you go to your cubby and put your things away. Then you go to your seat, and all those things really broken down. We have a daily advisory with the middle school. So they're using that restorative circles, not so much for the restorative piece of it, but to build community. And lots of activities designed to increase the sense of student belonging and responsibility. The introduction in the advisory, using that time to introduce the standard operating procedures, and lots of targeted instruction through that advisory on respect for self and others. And the middle school has divvied up the advisory so that one teacher does it every week. So the entire middle school is getting the same information each week in advisory. The other thing is the focus on positive adult language, which comes from Responsive Classroom, which is a consistent recognition and reinforcement of the expected behaviors. So not only do we teach them what the behaviors are, we're constantly reinforcing that this is what the expectation is and recognizing students when they meet that expectation. Really big emphasis on consistency from class to class and teacher to teacher, and having the adults share the effective use of positive adult language. So ways that they address it. Thank you.
Thanks, Rosanna.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Neil McIntyre. I am the principal at Floodbrook School. This year, our general goal areas are going to be to improve our math performance and improve community relationships. Next slide, please. So in the process to do all of this, we have to do a root cause analysis of all of the issues that we think are most pressing in our schools. And the state has a process through which we have to go through that. We have to go through a 5 whys process or a fishbone diagram process. We have to create SMART goals. And then from those SMART goals, we have to devise larger sub goals within there to reach our overall school goal. So what we have found, so I start with our findings, we found that a disproportionate number of our low socioeconomic students are represented in the lowest quartile of our math assessment data. I won't bother reading through all of this, but we have about a 15% disparity between our non-economically disadvantaged students and our economically disadvantaged students in math proficiency. And we found that there's about less than a fifth of our less than a fifth of our non-disadvantaged students are scoring at level 1 on SBAC performance, while greater than a quarter of our low socioeconomic students are performing at level 1 of proficiency. So we found that basically our disadvantaged students are having a harder time accessing information, and that we have to address that need to create greater parity in our academic program. And then we did a root cause analysis into our behavioral data, and we found that school-wide, the data is suggesting that there's a difficulty with teachers and students forming trusting relationships with one another. We found that children who fit into typically marginalized groups such as boys, low socioeconomic students, students with OHI diagnoses, they are much more heavily represented in our behavioral data than students who don't belong in those demographic areas. So going through in this case, we went through a fishbone diagram process, and what we found was that the relationships between teachers and students are at the heart of this, and that if trusting, nurturing relationships can be established and consistent with all students and teachers, then we expect that there will be a substantial decrease in the problem classroom. Slide. So as I said, students scoring in the lowest quartile are our target for our academic goal. So what we have endeavored to do is that we will, our students will approach proficiency at a rate comparable to or exceeding the state standard as measured by IRED. We created this goal and took a little bit of a gamble creating it because it's not as specific as we would like it to be, but at the same time, we're lacking a significant chunk of data from last year because we missed a lot of assessments. So what we're saying is we're basically saying in this goal that we are going to put all of our eggs into the iReady basket as both a means with which to benchmark our students and track their improvement over the course of the year. So iReady allows us to do benchmarking assessments for our students in mathematics and also progress monitoring in between those benchmark assessments. So we're going to be using iReady that will, in an effort to make sure that we're using timely and targeted interventions for our struggling students and keep everybody level playing field. Next slide. So all BRSU schools are implementing iReady this year. So the benchmarking happens 3 times a year. And then we will be using progress monitoring in between those benchmarks, as I said. And then in addition to that, the Floodbrook leadership team is going to engage in data-wise training so that the members of the leadership team can support teacher teams in use of good math data. That'll help them develop targeted next steps. Next slide. Our second goal is improving the relationships between our students and our teachers and students with one another. We endeavor to reduce office discipline referrals by 50% by the end of the 2021 school year, which is a very ambitious goal. We think we can do this by using restorative practices in our school to help build community. We also think that we can use restorative practices to help teachers as they advance in their training with problem solving in the classroom, conflict resolution, and restorative practices. And then in addition to that, we are going to be the school engaged in an all-school read, hacking school discipline. We redefined the guidance and social worker, job scope and responsibilities, and our student support team has enhanced relationships and partnership with neighborhood connections that help them support both students and their families towards reaching this goal.
Oh, hold on, now I can't get it to stop. Thanks, Neil. All right, Deb and Betsy.
Hi, I'm Deb Fishwick. I'm one of the 2 principals at Manchester Elementary Middle School. Betsy, are you, I don't see your picture, so I can't tell where you are.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm Betsy Nemo, the other principal at Manchester.
So our goals are very similar to the other goals that you've heard this evening. We have both an academic goal and a goal around safe and healthy schools. And our academic goal is to increase student knowledge and understanding of mathematical concepts and mathematical reasoning.
And our safe and healthy schools goal is to implement a coordinated systemic response to students' social emotional needs.
So academic proficiency goal by the end of the 2021 school year, Manchester Elementary Middle School will demonstrate at least 1 year growth on the iReady spring assessment in the area of mathematics. And again, we did a root cause analysis. We looked at our data over time at the Manchester Elementary School, and we saw that our growth was relatively flat. And again, there was a significant difference between our students who were socioeconomically disadvantaged.
In the set,
Did I blow that? Sorry.
that's okay.
Go ahead. Sorry.
In the Safe and Healthy Schools goal, by the end of the year of 2021, Manchester Elementary Middle School will reduce the number of major and minor referrals, as well as reducing the number of social emotional intensive interventions by implementing a coordinated and timely systemic response to students' needs.
Okay, now the next slide. So our baseline data, as I had mentioned, on the SBAC assessment, which is a Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium, our data from the 2016 to 2019, students had not shown significant growth in the area of mathematics. The overall proficiency in mathematics is 40%. That's for our total population. And if you separate out our population who are socioeconomically disadvantaged, only 28% of those students are meeting proficiency in mathematics.
And in the Safe and Healthy Schools, based on our data from August 2019 to March of 2020, our Swiss data, which is a school-wide information system, indicated that 21% of students have had 6 or more experiences of emotional dysregulation. And what that takes a lot of resources to respond to, as well as time out of the classroom. So we feel if we target this area, it will make a substantial difference across every system in our school.
And our hope also is that by addressing the socioeconomic, the social emotional health of our students, that will help them better access their learning. So our action steps in the academic area, teachers will use the data to tailor and guide mathematics instruction. They'll align instruction with the BRSU priority proficiencies, and they'll work with a coach and a math interventionist to review and use data to adjust lessons to meet the needs of their learners.
The Safe and Healthy Schools, our social emotional team is going to do a regular review each month of the behavior data and design proactive intervention responses for learners, as well as we've already begun working with our teachers to help them recognize signs of dysregulation and intervene early. We're in our 3rd year as a PBIS school. The first 2 years, we focused on kind of the baseline tier 1 supports. And this year we're moving into the targeted, which will align nicely with the goal that we've chosen.
Thank you both very much. And Jen.
Hi, I'm Jen Turner, the principal at Sunderland. And like the other schools, we have an academic proficiency goal and a safe and healthy schools goal. Some of the other principals have talked about this, but I found that the process that we went through to really get to these goals was really powerful. We started with looking at our data and a data inventory and really poring over what we saw over 3 years. And in mathematics, a trend emerged showing fewer students meeting growth each year, which obviously was a concern. And then in our office discipline referrals, that's behavior data, the most common behaviors we were seeing were physical aggression, and the second most common was disrespect. From there, we went into the 5 whys that Neil mentioned, and it's a series of questions you go through to kind of determine what you think the root cause is. And in mathematics, it was lack of students exploring and making meaning. And for the behavior data, it was insufficient professional development on developing students' problem solving and self-regulation skills. So from there, we completed the driver diagram, which gets you to the place of action steps, which we'll talk about in a couple slides. Next slide. Here's the baseline data that we're going to be looking to improve. On the left is the mathematics, and you can see that K's growth was very strong from fall to winter last year, but all the rest of them have, well, most of them have room for some significant improvement. And the ODRs, this will be interesting to because it was only a portion of our year, but we'll do some fancy math to see about the decrease in the physical aggression and the disrespect that we've been seeing. Next slide. Okay, so our academic goal is about mathematics, and we're going to be looking for a 10% increase in the number of students meeting mathematical growth. We'll be using iReady this year, but we will be comparing to growth from the previous year. That was NWEA. So it's not apples to apples, but it's growth nonetheless. And this improvement will be a result of focus on the exploration and making meaning. The action steps that we're going to take are the teachers engaging in professional learning activities to support exploration, making meaning. The instructional coach and I have already talked about this, and we have some ideas about how we can engage teachers in really thinking about each lesson and looking for those opportunities for exploration and making sure they're making meaning as they go. Woo.
I don't know.
And then also high leverage instructional practices will be hand in hand at those things that we can do for kids so that they are really engaged. Participation, engagement activities, and then even like asking, how do you know, or why is that so? And I will be doing walkthroughs during mathematics instruction to see if I'm seeing evidence of that. Next slide. And so our safe and healthy schools goal is that 10% decrease in the referrals that are physical aggression and disrespect. And second step is programming that has been in the school for a couple of years now, but honestly, I don't feel it's being taught with fidelity. And so that's where we're going to focus our attention. And so our action steps, our teachers and staff will engage in professional learning activities to support the second step. They'll increase a connection to second step in the PBIS that we do. And the teachers will be implementing the lessons, and I will be doing the walkthroughs during morning meeting when these lessons are taught. And both of these connect to several of the ends policies. Obviously, there's a need for students to demonstrate competency in mathematics, but the respect for individual differences, inclination to work with others for the common good, and responsibility for making a positive contribution connects to our behavior goals.
Okay, thank you. So thank you to all of the principals for making a presentation today. And, I think we are transitioning into really looking at what we're doing in our classrooms, and it's a good launch for us right now to start to focus on our goals and doing the work for the year. So I'm going to stop sharing. And so given where we are with time, my thought was to kind of allow 5 to 10 minutes of questions. Obviously, Herb, should you decide that you are interested in expanding that or changing that at all, I'll kind of turn that over to you to make a decision. But my thought was if principals and Skylar can stay on, if people have questions, this would be a good time. And then when we're finished, I would likely have everyone leave if they're interested in going.
Yeah, I think it would make sense if we tried to wind up this phase by, let's say, 7:25 anyway. So if you have a question, raise your hand, and I guess either Randy or I will try to spot you and tell you to unmute, and
We've got
you have
Dick.
to say.
Yep, Dick's ready, I think.
Dick, yes.
To what degree, with hybrid learning, will identifying trends and lack of progress in meeting your goals with respect to socialization be more difficult in a similar vein, since mathematics is difficult for most parents to mentor and explain on almost every level? How will this delay potential improvement, especially at the lower socioeconomic level and group.
Dick,
Anybody else?
I'd like, is that something I can try to tackle? Dick, so I think what I'm hearing you ask is, how are we, and I might need you to start from the question for me a little bit. Are we going to be able to track the data, especially our social and emotional learning goals, when we only have some of our kids some of the time?
Yes.
Am I summarizing it okay? It's going to be
Reasonable
difficult.
summarization.
Okay, so I think one of the things we're trying to take advantage of the situation while we can. So while we were planning this summer, one of the things that we said was, how can we lean into the circumstances that we've been dealt? And so one of the ways we can do that is take advantage of the smaller class sizes. It's easier to build closer relationships between teachers and kids. For example, it's easier for teachers because you have a smaller number of kids that can get more of your attention. Teachers can more flexibly try new things. And have it be at lower risk because there's quite frankly, there's less supervision needed. They need to have fewer eyes in the back of their head. And so when you have a class of 17 or 18 kids, and right now, I mean, we have classrooms with 4 or 5 kids, and it really does allow the teacher to take time to connect with the kids who are there. And then what we're finding is the distance learning interactions. Interestingly, the mute button has changed things for teachers because they can really focus on one conversation with one kid at a time, really get at what that child is trying to communicate and very clearly communicate with that child without being interrupted by the rest of the world around them. So I think there are a lot of things that our teachers are excited to be working on right now because they're finding there's actually a little bit more real estate, if you will, a little bit more ability to work on these and hone in on specific needs of kids, socially and emotionally. When it comes to academics, the great thing about iReady is something that can progress monitor and benchmark kids, whether they're in the classroom or out of the classroom. And then what it does is it generates great reports at the tail end of the benchmarking sessions that basically helps the teachers group kids by general ability areas, and it also provides logical next teaching steps for the teachers. So all of these things together we're finding that there's actually a lot of opportunity, and we're trying to take advantage of the opportunity while it's here to work on our practices and to try to try to experiment a little bit when we have a smaller team size, if that makes sense. How did I do with that, everybody? Anybody got anything to add?
All right. Thank you, Neil. John Wilson?
And I don't have all the goals, I took a lot of notes, but I don't have the goals in front of me. But Dick, maybe more also to the point, I think were all those goals used with iReady as the baseline this fall? Is that correct?
Yes.
So I think that in some respect, it is a little bit apples to apples if we're going fall to spring. And I also have understood that these won't be, we won't be able to use these to track longitudinal data from the NWEA MAP scores, correct? This is not a RIT scale.
I'm going to let Skylar jump in on the work we're doing with that, John, to help you understand what we're.
Yep. I guess to my point, for here, if all these goals seem like they're measuring the fall to the spring, and that growth might be more apples to apples than measuring from. So I think it's a good way to set goals for this year.
Yep, that's absolutely accurate. Yeah, we wanted to try to do apples to apples with respect to historical and longitudinal data, which I know we had mentioned at a meeting prior when I was on talking about iReady. It doesn't use a RIT scale, as you've pointed out, but it does have its own calculated scale. The apples to apples when we're thinking about iReady and MAP would be more through the normative data, where it's like, here is your grade level average for this particular biological age, or so that would be as close to apples as we could get between those two assessments. But yeah, these goals are definitely fall to spring. Hopefully we can have some level of consistency in instructional model, whether in person or at a distance from fall to spring, but I think we're all kind of waiting to see how that all plays out.
Can I ask?
So John, it's hard for us to have baseline quantitative data on that because we're using a new measuring stick now. So, but what we did was we used backwards looking data to say, what are the trends telling us? And okay, now we're using this new measuring stick. So we're using those trends to inform what we're looking for, understanding that we're using this new measuring stick.
Hey guys, just one more quick question on the goal, Chairman.
Yeah.
The goals. I'm wondering if I think the goals are really admirable, and I like the specificity of them, and they're big goals, and especially the SEL goals, and seeing reductions in SEL interventions. And I imagine it must have been really tough, for Skylar as a leader of this to do this in a pandemic when we're coming out of a national trauma, a global trauma, really. What do we almost expect that we'll have more SEL interventions as a way of, really pushing? And I know there's how you categorize SEL interventions, but I expect that there could be more, and that's not a bad thing necessarily. I don't want the schools to feel like our schools to feel like they failed on that, because these are extraordinary times.
Yeah, I mean, you have an excellent point. I think the experience of trauma that we've all had, even you as board members and us as professionals that work with kids and teachers, I know that Randy has been pretty consistent in the relationship, safety, and trust. That has been the focus of the first 4 weeks of school. And I know that teachers now, because I'm getting emails pretty regularly, like, when can we start assessing kids and start the academic work? And that while the academic work is important, I think it's also important to first make sure kids are comfortable and safe. When speaking of a reduction of, like, I think about significant incidents reportable to the state, so things like suspensions. We had a reduced in-person year last year. So if we're using last year's data to say we want to do a 10% less, it kind of brings up an interesting point, because we had significantly less in-person days. So those are all things we're looking at historically, the number of suspensions that we have. And yeah, I mean, it brings up an interesting point, because of the new structures that are in place in our schools and protocols that students have to follow, and they might be difficult for them to follow and understand. So I can say that Randy has led us well in really focusing on relationship safety and trust, and making sure that kids feel comfortable coming back into our system and understand why those things are at the forefront of everything we do now.
Thank you. Ben, did you have your hand up a while ago?
I did, and I'm mulling on a question or a thought, but I don't want to get in the way of somebody else's question. If I can wait.
Looks like Jane has a question or a comment.
Sure.
Jane.
This may be directed, I guess, to Skylar or Neil. I think you started to answer Dick's question there. But I think, Skylar, in the past, you had presented how there was going to be training for parents, especially like around math and how they can work with their kids. I don't know if I've missed something, but has that program already unfolded? And if so, what kind of success have you had with it, or response?
We have not begun training specific to math. We do have a parent support site as far as how to access all of the resources that are available to them. That's more targeted towards our distance learners. But yes, that is something that I know is needed, and we have iReady support will help too. When kids do their iReady instruction, parents will get an inside look as to how things are playing out. So yes, we have a parent support site. I would say, has it rolled out specifically to support any particular content area at this point? I wouldn't say that's happened yet.
Ben, shall we come back to you now?
Sure. I guess a part of what I was mulling over was, I was struck by the socio-emotional learning goals as well, and thinking about this interesting time that we're in, that that we may well see a greater incidence of young people acting out as they try to make sense of what's going on in their personal lives, and especially getting into middle grades in understanding the world that they're growing up into, but also to Neil's point of, that there's a great opportunity to develop relationships in a different way with this, with much smaller groupings, with a greater emphasis on getting kids outside, honestly, on the flexibility of the hybrid learning where kids who are at home in a positive, healthy environment are able to self-regulate and, move when they need to move, take breaks when they need to take breaks, create different types of meanings with the learning that they're doing outside sort of the traditional walls of the classroom. I wonder if how those things will play out. And it just gets me to thinking about the root causes of some of the socio-emotional behavioral issues that we've had, and whether some of those are actually alleviated by the new structure, and whereas some are exacerbated by obviously the global context. And so I would love for us to continue to analyze that as we come out of this time and think about what we can take with us, as Neil was saying, on the positives, and thinking about relationships and thinking about meaning making for youth. And I really want to applaud the work that sounds like all the schools are doing around restorative practices work and circle practice with youth and making sense of that social emotional issues. So it's not really a question, but just sort of a pondering.
Anybody else?
Good.
I just had one question. Hold it. Deb has a question.
No, I just wanted to say thank you.
My question is, are we going to preserve what we just saw so that we can come back to it next year and find out what happened?
So we will be following up. When and how we do that, I would say I'm not entirely sure. We typically have visited progress in school data in February, but it doesn't make a lot of sense for us to do that as we look at what the goals are. So we will revisit it. The question is when. I have some thoughts, and I'll share those with you as we move forward. I have this idea of sort of how I'd like to tackle this on a more long-term basis. We just got a little bit derailed by this particular summer. But yes, we will revisit it, and you will find out the progress that our schools made toward achieving their goals.
Thank you. Have I missed anybody? If I did, wave at me. All right.
Okay.
So I think we can go on to community engagement meetings then.
Yes, let's do that before our principals and Skylar leave. I really do want to take a moment to communicate very clearly how proud I am to work with these amazing leaders. In the 3 months that I've been doing this job, we have gotten very close. We've learned a lot from each other, and I have seen unbelievable commitment, work, tenacity, perseverance, and just ethic to the commitment that I can't even begin to express to you. We're really, really fortunate, and I just really need to say that clearly and publicly. I am incredibly grateful for you and for the work you've done. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so if you'd like to listen, you can stay. And I know some of you have some celebrations that you're heading to, but feel free to stay or leave depending on what kind of feels best for you. So, the next agenda item is community engagement. I've had the opportunity to work with our community engagement team, who include Deb and Melanie and John and Ben, and Bob has been at each meeting, and I have been at each meeting. So I'm going to turn this over to you, Ben, to summarize, and then I'm sure other people have lots to say. It's been really great work, and to think that we've done what we've done in the last over a month on this is pretty exciting. So you have some documents in your packet, and I'll give it to you, Ben, for the next little while. Okay.
Thanks. Well, I would just echo some of what Randy said, and that it has been we've had some really interesting conversations in this little subcommittee, unofficial committee, ad hoc committee. I'm channeling Jay's words from the past of saying that this can't be official. We have to, this is not what we do. But it was really valuable to have that time to pull aside and to examine what it is that we were trying to do and how that fits in with with the way that we're operating under policy governance, and to try to figure out, how do we go about this. So I attempted to document some of what we did, and which is in your board packet. So I won't read through all of that. I hope you had a chance to skim some of that yourself. But we essentially worked off of the guidelines that we'd come up with as a whole board in a previous meeting, and used that as our launching place to say, what are the questions that we need to answer? What are the tasks that we need to take on? And then went about sort of just brainstorming with one another and talking through that, realizing after, as we went through about an hour of our first meeting time, that we were going to need a bunch more thought and a bunch more time to work on this. So processed some things, did some homework, came back, shared again, and effectively came up with where we are now, which is that we laid out a couple of phases to the work, and some goals to what it is that we're trying to achieve. And some of that is on the documentation purposes page, which is packet page 11, which just says has our why and our how, and sort of lays out some of the pieces of the phases that we're going through. Essentially, our why is related to setting our ends policy. That's our primary purpose. But we also were really recognizing that a big part of our goals as a board are to effectively engage with the community and understanding what the community's values are, how they think about schools, and how that should influence what we do as a board. So that's what we came up with. We in the context that we're in with COVID and with the schools, everybody trying to reopen and going through all these different phases and not knowing what the future will bring, we opted to keep things pretty simple in the first phase of things, and start with a simple survey with one core question related to what is the purpose of school in today's world. We spent more time than you'd think wordsmithing around, trying to figure out what just the right language is to keep it at a level that is approachable by all different members in our community, and yet would get people to think in a variety of different ways about what they think about the purpose of education in today's modern world. So linked to this document is a survey that can go out digitally. We're not launching this today. This is all still in draft form, but that has that core question in it that can be filled out online and submitted, as well as some supplementary optional questions to get more at some of the deeper thoughts that people might have about what we talked about is strengths, opportunities, aspirations, and results, a SOAR methodology of looking at a situation, a problem, or an idea. So what we're proposing is that in phase one, we will, in a variety of different ways, try to get this survey and that core question out into our community, and that we have some ideas about intentional ways of reaching some of the traditional marginalized or less heard members in our communities, partnering with some local organizations, reaching out through a variety of media, through students, in a bunch of different ways. And we're right now in the time frame where we're going to be looking to develop some plans around that, working with Bob, working with Randy, working with perhaps some teachers, some principals, so that by January, we'll enter into the phase where we're actually seeking information from the public. And we think that may be a good time to do this. And that's a big with a big asterisk next to it. But essentially, all of us as board members will be responsible in some way for getting out into the community, finding the venues and the connections that we have to collect and gather information, as well as doing some really targeted messaging and reaching out to reach some of those groups that we might not regularly reach. Then collect that information, bring it back. We've got some ideas around processing that information, but ultimately to get to the place by the time we reach next summer and going into our board retreat, we'll have really good information that we can use in order to inform the crafting of our ends policy. So that's that's sort of like the broad strokes of what we're talking about doing, and some of the language about how we propose to do that is in this document. Page 10 is so sort of the simplified language, the sort of most straightforward way of representing this that might go out in an email format. The little bit more denser language that is in the survey is the first piece in the packet, page 8. And that's broken down within that online Google survey. So it's not all in one whack, but you get it broken down. And then also linked into the document is a look at a sketch at a timeline that has some of the major things that are going on for the board and in the school year timeframe, and that places our different data collection phases in there. So I think I'm going to hit pause there and allow the other members of the committee to jump in and add and correct and whatever needs to be done. So, Deb, John, Melanie.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. I think you've captured it. I mean, that took us a long time to get to that, but it was really productive. And I'm looking forward to all of us working on it and seeing what we can get. That COVID has put a constraint on how we can reach people, but I think this will do it.
Don't think we have Melanie with us tonight, but John, do you want to add anything?
I'm here if you guys can hear me.
Oh, sorry.
Oh.
Go ahead,
No,
Mel.
I've had Zoom and my computer not getting along today in a very big way. But I'm here on my phone and sound anyway. Yeah, I was gonna, I'd say that this was a great activity, and it's almost a shame that only us committee members got to do it, because I think everybody would enjoy it. There was one thing that we didn't necessarily resolve, but we did throw out there about getting some preliminary information and really just kind of testing the grounds for, how our main question might go over. And we talked about, and this is kind of I don't really know where to go with this as far as if the entire board wants to chime in on whether they'd like to do this or not. But we discussed showing up at our polling places and having some kind of a visual, really simple, poster board with Post-it notes, and see if, members of our community that, we know vote, but may not necessarily have kids at the schools. And, we might have a hard time reaching out to them, if this might be a good place to start just getting, trying to garnish feedback and, putting ourselves out there in the community right off the bat and letting them know that we're looking for this information. We're looking for the thoughts of our community. Because we know this will be should be a pretty well attended event. So I'm kind of putting this out to hear what everybody, to see what anybody else thinks about that. For the most part, I'm game to do it in Sunderland or split it up. We don't have to do it in our own communities because, clearly we're here for all the kids in all our communities. But I don't know, it's open for suggestion on that.
John, do you want to add anything before other folks?
Yeah, I just want to give that a little bit more context. And thanks, Ben, for really doing a good job at distilling and solidifying a lot of this. And I'll try to make sense. I'm fried from teaching, and it's a great activity in profession right now, but it's very tiring. So I'll try to be lucid. But I think that what we found this question to be so meaningful, because you can ask anyone this question and it has an answer, and it has, we thought it showed the best representations of someone's values, and we're really trying to measure the values of the community. I think we have ways that, part of our thinking too was that, we'll get this first round of data, and that will inform how we move forward. That could inform how we move forward. In our scientific process here. But I think that, for my money, that one of the maybe the best outcomes we can achieve, and I'm sorry if Ben already alluded to this, we can achieve with this is having board members themselves be, the people seeking the answers to these questions, and that we get in that habit of asking the people in our communities, and not just our towns, right? The communities, I'm asking people in Weston, even though I'm from Manchester, right? Asking them this question, and that, how do we become not the gatekeepers from this information, but, that we really get involved, all of us, in this question. And I think what Mel was suggesting is one step in that. And I don't know, I think it's a good grocery store question.
Mhm. Yeah.
Deb, go ahead.
I was just going to say, when we looked at the Carver instructions on how to write an ends policy, the ends policy will need to define what is our essential contribution or benefit that students derive from our work. What are we there for? What is the essence? And it also needs to ask our stakeholders at what cost. And we don't really want to get into a discussion on tax rates and budgets and all that, but at some way we need to sort of let people tell us what this is worth to them, and that's tricky. I mean, we don't want to go down any rabbit holes, but we want to let people tell us whatever they want to say.
Anybody have any suggestions on how to do that?
I think you've got David and Jane with questions. I'm not sure if they have answers to that one, but
Well, let's take David and then Jane.
Yes, I just wanted to weigh in right from the beginning. First of all, this is amazing. It's an amazing piece of work, and I'm very, very impressed by what everyone put together. You start with the survey, and it's a good format. It's, as John said, it's a question that everybody has an answer to. So it's short and sweet, but it provides opportunity for elaboration for those who want to do that. So it's fabulous. And then the other documents, you start reading them and you realize how you achieved this simple and concise format that is so applicable to many different people, those who are wordy and those who aren't. So you've got all the support information, and then you start to talk about where it will take us with the timeline. So I was quite impressed by the whole completeness of the work. I don't know how you did it, but so I want to thank you on that, and because it's clear that you really pieced everything together and came up with a nice whole package that I think is going to work. Melanie is a perfectionist, and she wants it to be the perfect thing for all people. But what you've created is a tool that you can manipulate and you can perfect over time. But it's a very good start. I do want to make one comment, which is I've always struggled with the idea that I'm very comfortable with the fact that all kids are our kids, but I've struggled with the fact that, okay, so you've got a guy from Dorset who knows the Dorset community pretty well, and you're going to send him off to Weston, or you're going to send him off to Londonderry and other places that he doesn't know, and try to get him to open up people when the way I can serve you all the best is if I work with my own community and get data and feedback and ideas, and then bring it to you and then hear what you guys come up with. And then together. So my point is, I don't think we should discourage people from engaging in their own communities and then listening to what you all bring forth from your communities. That's my piece.
Jane?
Kudos, just like what David and all the others said. I mean, it's a major piece of work, and it's amazing, Randy, to hear that you guys, and Ben, that you guys did this in a month. The one idea that I had to help build consistency, I think, and making sure there's that representation, and then also speaking to David's concern about the representation. I think this is a great thing to bring up as a town hall agenda item somehow. I don't know what that means, you know, whether it's somehow placed in the form of taking the advantage of doing some sort of poll on a piece of paper, a survey. But I think that legitimizes that community involvement, which cuts across, we know, or at least I think when I attend town hall meetings, it usually does do a pretty good job about cutting across different socioeconomic, I think, levels and different people. But again, I think it legitimizes that community process too, not to say that other venues couldn't be used, but I just think it's a really important one for a project like this to tap into.
Anybody else? Oh, Melanie is here in person now.
Herb, I've got one more thing to add.
Go ahead.
And I think John does too. He's got his hand up. But thanks for the positive feedback from folks and some good thoughts shared there as well. And I think, you know, we do need to go spend some time over the next bit of time, certainly before January, to map out how we want to roll this out and reach the broad audience that's our intention. And I'm really appreciative to have Bob in the team and to help work with us on some of that communication stuff. It's really helpful. I did want to just point to there's a piece at the very end I just jotted as additional notes, and to say that we spent a bit of time talking about the future work of the board, and specifically related to community engagement and equity, and how those two pieces are really important to our board work and in our communities right now. And that we all felt some, I think I can speak fairly to say that we all felt some enthusiasm around working with some trained facilitators to engage a much more significant portion of our community around these issues in particular. And that this may be something for us as a board to look to for future years. This is not a this year thing, but there are several organizations in Vermont that work specifically with communities around some of these issues that we may be able to get some grant money to support us working with them, that I think would be really beneficial in the long run. So I don't know how when and how we go after that, but it's definitely something that we spend a little bit of time talking about as a committee.
What Ben's talking about is at the bottom of packet, page 13, if you haven't found it. John.
Yeah, I think I just want to speak to David and Jane's point. And I think, David, you threw a nice mend in my my comment there, because I don't want to discourage us, soliciting responses from our own communities. I think I just don't want to exclude us from soliciting from other communities. I don't think that's what you were saying either. I think what's the purpose of this question, or why we ask it? We ask it to get, so we can get that good feedback from our own community, but we also get it. I think it's an opportunity for us to listen and just broaden our own perspectives for our larger community. And I think we need to ask it in a lot of different places, whether it's, in the grocery store or at some town meeting. And what we talked about this a lot too, and what I found as a teacher most exciting, and I've done this before with students, because my favorite people to ask this question to is students, and engaging, and I kind of wish I think Carolyn's here too, but for other principals to hear us talk about, having students in the BRSU really be a part of this, answering this question, because I think that mindfulness of why am I here, is really important for creating self-agency and self-direction. So that's something I'm really personally excited about, how we can engage the schools as a big part of this process.
Anybody else want to be heard about this? Jane.
Yeah, I think to piggyback, John, on what you were just saying, Right now, I'm facilitating for the Vermont Council of Developmental Disabilities and with Family Network. They're providing seven focus groups throughout the state of Vermont to get input from parents and caregivers of persons with disabilities, developmental disabilities, as well as the persons themselves, from children all the way through adulthood. And I have to tell you, I was surprised by just how many really did bring up issues that were germane to how are we teaching these children in schools and what are they really having with measurable outcomes. So I just want to say, hope that you include those two groups as well to tag into, because they also provide funds. They're in the process right now doing their 5-year strategic plan. And so what I'm facilitating is these groups to gain that input on answering certain kinds of questions, what to stop, what needs to stop, what needs to start, what do we need more of. So hope you include those kind of groups too. Thanks.
Would anybody else like to talk about this? Yes, Deb.
I just had another thing we talked about was there is a benefit right now to crafting our ends policy from this work, but we're hoping that in the process we'll find some people in the community who just want to keep involved, and that we can always consult them when we need opinions from our community, that we might find a group of people who would like to continue to advise us and then be involved.
Anybody else? Don't see any more comments. Okay, thank you very much. So the next item is quite different. It's the it's an incidental information, and the first piece is the financial management questionnaire.
Well, so the financial management questionnaire is distribution. So it's for your information as well as my superintendent report. And I wanted to leave a few minutes if people had questions about my report. I'm happy to answer any.
So why don't we say that if you have a question about either the questionnaire or the report, now would be the time to ask it, or if you have a comment. And that's packet pages 15 through quite a bit, actually.
22, I think.
Yeah.
David?
David, did you have a question?
I have a quick question, and that is on packet page 18, or your page 2, under enrollment, talk about how secondary numbers for students are currently 4.39 students over budget. So that means that's the number of students in excess of the 15 GO students that we started with. So that you're talking about 19 or 20 high school students. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So, all right. Thank you. That's all.
You're welcome.
Who else?
Melanie, Deb. Mel, do you want to go?
Go ahead, Mel.
Yeah, I guess you mentioned revenues from the school meals program, but then on the last page you commented that we didn't operate a summer meals program.
Yeah,
So
I'm curious about that too.
Okay, hold on.
The second to last paragraph, the last paragraph, not including the last statement, says, although we did not operate a summer meals program, all eligible expenses incurred in June were submitted.
All right. Are you referring to my report?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah. The Taconic Green Regional School District year-end review.
Yep, that's not the agenda. Sorry, we're not on that agenda item yet. I'm looking at my superintendent report. That's the FY20. That's going to be Sue's report down the line.
Yeah,
I'll answer that in a bit.
Yeah, sorry. I'm like, I did not talk about that.
No.
Report. Okay, Deb.
I just have a question about about reducing the student attendance days from 175 to 170. Are those days maintained as professional development, or are they just eliminated? And why do we do that?
I don't know yet what we're doing. So I really don't know. I've been engaging, just started conversations with principals. I really want to make a well thought out decision, and there are many factors to consider. We have some flexibility with that. Does it make sense to do something or not? There's a lot of things we're thinking through. We will make a decision in the next couple of weeks, but I don't want to rush it. So I've got all the principals thinking about this as well. We're going to continue to talk about it. We may make a decision next week, but if we're not ready, we'll wait a little longer.
Who else has a comment or
Rachel?
question?
Are there any plans, is the in-person learning what it is, or will there be a phase 3 where everyone goes back, or phase 4 where everyone goes back? Because
so I tried to address that in my report. If you look in the third paragraph under school update, you know, that the challenge that we have, and I do think this is important because it comes up for everyone. The challenge is that we're required to follow physical safety distance guidelines. And to be totally honest, about half an hour before this meeting, we just received I opened guidance on FAQs around physical distancing. So it's constantly evolving, but there's square footage requirements for how many kids can be in what size classroom. School districts all over the state are approaching this very differently. What I've said is we're going to follow the social distance guidance that we need to, right? We have 3 feet, 6 feet per person in order to mitigate the spread. But the challenge we have is that we have classrooms that are hugely variable in size. And we have class sizes that are hugely variable. Many systems are saying, all right, we're going to bring all our first graders back, all our second graders back. But when you really unpack that, it doesn't make a lot of sense. You end up with some classrooms that are not able to maintain that distance, and you have others that are swimming. So after a lot of work with our principals, we said, you know what? I'm turning this over to you. If you've got if you have a first grade class that you can bring back 4 days a week, bring them back. If whatever that class size is, we're going to maximize in as timeframes as safe to do so as possible. So that means that we are going to have, for instance, some third grade classrooms in which students will be able to come back 4 days a week. We'll have other third grade classrooms that may only be able to come back 2 or 3 days a week. So that is, I just had some communication with somebody in the last couple of days. It's inherently not fair, right? It doesn't feel right. But if I had to make a consistent response, it would likely mean nobody's going to go back 4 days, because I'm going to have to go to that lowest or highest common denominator and say, well, if this class of 20, I can't bring them back, then I'm not bringing back this class of 8 either, right? Which it does not feel like a good educational decision. So all our principals right now are actively working on looking at their numbers, looking at when and how they can bring students back more. And we will continue to watch the distance. I haven't read it. I just forwarded it to principals. I haven't even read the FAQs. We'll see how it loosens. That might be part of the guidance that comes from this transition to step 3. We're also expecting an update on the strong and healthy start guidance from the state, and I expect it to address physical distancing. So we'll keep responding and we'll keep moving. And we're working on getting everyone back as much as possible.
Awesome.
I don't anticipate that we will be operating without restrictions this year.
I think that's fair.
And I think the state AOE, Agency of Education, hasn't yet actually defined a phase 4, has it?
Yeah, there is not a phase 4. Phase 4 would be we're back fully operational with no restrictions whatsoever. And nobody, the guidance I'm getting is consistently saying we should not be expecting that. Even if there is a vaccine, they will see that as one more layer of the mitigating factors: masks, social distancing, cleaning, washing your hands, and vaccine. not vaccine, everything else is gone. So that's what we're operating with right now, which I think is important to know and understand.
Other questions or comments?
Ben?
Yeah, I mean, I just sort of feel like we have to keep remembering that, that all of these different protocols and practices that we're putting in place they're the right thing to be doing, but so much of the reason why things are as good as they are is because it's just not in our communities. And that, I mean, having been to now a few soccer games and, seen some other interactions of, youth and students mingling, and as much work as we're trying to do, there's still like, these are young young kids who are moving around, and if we put them all in the same building, it's going to be really hard to manage it. So it's like, kudos to all the work that's being done, and I'm not in any way undermining it, but I think it's just, the world is going to change when this shows up in our communities with some greater numbers than it is now, and we just have to be ready for that. And so I'm really grateful that for all the things that are put in place, and the ability to respond quickly as needed seems to be still paramount in all the work. So
seems to me that one of the reasons it hasn't shown up much is thanks to the parents. And I'm wondering, are there ways that we should keep thanking the parents and keep reminding them that, particularly with the younger kids, they are the folks who are going to determine whether we have kids who are exposed to the virus?
Our principals are working really hard on a regular basis to communicate and remind about travel, about all of the different practices that we can be engaging in outside of our school buildings, and the importance of them within our school buildings. The travel map is updated on Tuesdays, and I'm seeing communication going out to schools, today, tomorrow, reminding people that the map's been updated. Please be careful. You're going to have to quarantine. If we're trying to communicate and celebrate and thank as much as possible, and maintain vigilance around the practices that we know will reduce the spread. So it's challenging work, and we're trying to be prepared. As I said in my report, every school is going through the desktop exercise, and it's a really well developed exercise of, there's a positive case in your school. This is what you can expect to happen. Pause, talk about it with your team. Principals and COVID building level teams are able to say, oh, wow, I didn't think about that. Okay, I want to make sure I've got this in place, and I want to make sure I've got this, so that should something happen, we're prepared to respond to the Department of Health, and we know the information they're going to need, and facilitating contact tracing. And, I think you're never really as prepared as, we'll never be fully prepared, but we'll be as prepared as we can be when something happens. I see Lindsay and John.
Lindsay, go ahead.
I had a question, because I was really surprised to see in the enrollment that numbers were down. And I had thought I saw a newspaper article that, I think it was maybe in Wynn Hall, that said that they actually had an increase because of people moving up from the city up here, that there was an increase of student enrollment. Maybe I have the wrong town. I just wasn't sure if, when you said that we were 94 students under the numbers in our budget, if that is not including homeschooled kids, or was that also including them, and just out of all the students, we're still 94 under?
Okay, so Wynn Hall's numbers are up, and I'm working hard on Wynn Hall's budget too, which is a very different conversation. So Wynn Hall is up. 94 is under budget, but we don't count home study students in that number. Okay, so, oh geez. Did I include, I think I included home study numbers right in my report. Okay, I was like, I think I included those. So home study, so if you look at my report, you will see under enrollment where we are with numbers, which I just don't want to misspeak. So 82, we had 82 students who are in home study. where we had 60 last year.
So that technically would be only 22 kids difference, which would then you would kind of account towards the 94 under.
Right. It helps offer the explanation.
Okay. Thank you. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. John?
John, go ahead.
And I'm not saying this is a good idea, but is it an option still, given that we're so early in the school year, to extend the calendar and be upfront that we're going to go, schools will go 4 days a week until whenever, essentially to buy ourselves more time and spread those 170 days more throughout the year with the hopes that maybe we'll have a vaccine or something in the spring that will make those days, we get more in-person days and essentially, more effective environments for delivering instruction.
So that's an interesting idea.
I know there's obscure, I think there's obscure school law about that something with tech districts that you have to match their
calendar.
Yeah, but I wonder if we can could there be forgiveness for that this year? And I know most parents would hate that most summers, but maybe this year is an exception.
I have no idea if we can do that. So I'm happy to look into it.
Mm-hmm.
I will say I'm thinking about winter. I think there's a lot of considerations. And I'm happy to look into that a little bit more. I don't know what is or isn't possible. And I bet not a lot of people have thought about that historically. But I'll look into it.
Good question. Who else, Melanie?
So I'm thinking ahead towards Thanksgiving and Christmas and recognizing the fragility of families and people right now. And I would anticipate that a lot of people are going to want to travel or have people come to them during that time. So it's kind of a two-part question. Is one, is there discussion about going remote during that time to account for quarantine for everyone? And and I think you addressed this maybe earlier in the year, but as far as absentees go, if someone, a family chooses, which is, is out of the student's hands, chooses to visit a family that they feel safe enough to do so, and therefore the kid can't come to school for 14 days, does that mark against them as absent if they're still doing their homeschool programming? Or I'm, just curious.
Yep. So our system has been built on how can we maximize stability over the long haul, regardless of what happens. So I'll respond to your second question first. We have students quarantining pretty much all the time, okay? If they're not sick, we expect them to attend distance learning, whether they're at home or whether in their classroom. They're working from their learning management system. They attend class. We've got all kinds of attendance protocols. If the child happens to be sick, then their parent will call them in sick, just like they would if they were not walking into the building. But for students who are in a required quarantine, we expect them to be present in learning. Your other question is very much on my mind. And that question, even expanded on, has been a topic of conversation with me on a number of levels. I have no answer other than to say to you, I'm concerned too, for exactly the reason you identified, as well as a number of other reasons. I'm not sure at this point what we as a system actually have the authority to do as it relates to that. I would push back pretty hard on somebody and say, hey, we've been given the authority as a system to do what we need. There's potential real benefit to making a decision like that. And there are also some real challenges of making a decision like that. So it's heavy on my mind. We have people who've been distant from their loved ones and close friends for many months now. And when you come to the holidays and they can't see their family, it's tough. And I'm not sure where we go with it, but it's definitely on my mind.
Who else? Randy, I have one question.
Sure.
The substitute teachers, it's at the bottom of packet page 18.
Mhm.
Maybe it's a question for Sue, I don't know. Do we have any impression about whether the availability has much to do with the pay rate, or is it just there's very, very few available to begin with?
Yeah, I don't, so you can jump in, but I don't think that it has to do with the pay rate. We have spent more time on substitute teachers, giving more attention to them as a population, providing training, reaching out personally, really trying to explore means by which they will feel safe coming in our buildings. And we are just continuing to come up short. We had another meeting today. Sue and I met with principals and we talked about this and talked through, okay, maybe we should change our approach. We've already incentivized pay and consistency in our system for subs, which last year was a very, very positive decision that quite a few people took advantage of. But it's tough, and it is a big deal. I mean, I'm just going to be really straight with all of you. We're worried as we continue that we might not have enough staff in our schools to operate. And if any of you are interested in subbing, let us know. We'd be happy to have you. We can make ourselves as marketable as you want, and any ideas you have, we're open to.
Is that even open to us still as board members?
I think so. What? I don't know. I'm new with this. Nobody's asked me that question. I'll say sure.
John Wilson's a teacher.
At a private school.
Yeah, you're not getting me. Sorry.
Very different. The BRSU isn't his and his boss. I know I've run into it in the past, and that was actually
that might be an issue.
I'm afraid it's an issue to be paid by the organization of which you're a board member.
We're happy to take volunteers too.
Yeah. Another question along that line, and maybe I'm just out of date on this. We don't have any full-time subs who are actually on staff permanently, do we?
We do have one, and to be honest, we posted that. I said to Sue, let's just post. Maybe people will want to come and be full-time employees. Because again, we're trying to think through every possible option of what would motivate people. And I was like, let's just do it because we have no applicants. How long has it been posted, Sue? 2 weeks?
At least 3, maybe more.
So again, I welcome any ideas and thoughts. And if you leave this meeting and have recommendations and suggestions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me.
You know, somebody who's interested, send them our way.
So before we leave this, my superintendent report is a new process for me. I feel like they're kind of long, but then I'm thinking maybe that's what you want. So after this meeting, if you have thoughts on the superintendent report or feedback of what you would like me to do, if I'm doing something different or continue doing what I'm doing, I would welcome just a quick email to give me some feedback. I want it to be a useful document for you with information that is relevant. And so I would appreciate any feedback that you have that about what's important to you. Okay.
That's not to say that you can't give feedback right now. Does anybody have any suggestions, comments? I mean, personally, I found it very helpful. Jim, same thing.
Okay.
Yeah, basically there's a lot here, but that's very much appreciated. It's really helpful to, get because it's hard to stay up on what's going on.
Okay.
It was terrific.
Okay.
Anybody else have any comments or questions on the superintendent's report? Not seeing.
I just popped something in the chat about just, and you get Sue and Randy may have thought about this, but reaching out to the state colleges and universities about, and if there's a way to employ some of the young college students and potentially ed majors who are not at school right now, but are in our area, and finding a way to connect with them. And I don't know what the implications on that or any kind of.
Yeah, so we haven't asked since the start of school. There were, a lot of the teacher prep programs in the colleges in the area are, there's a lot of kind of restrictions on where they can go and what they can do. that doesn't mean that there isn't an opportunity there. So we can follow up and see if people do, what might we creatively be able to work out. So I think that's a good idea for us to follow up on and see.
And does the agency of ed have any power to give waivers to get around some of the current restrictions?
For teachers or for subs?
For subs.
There's not a lot of restrictions. You have to have a high school degree and either the equivalent of two years of college, or take the para pro test and pass that. So and then obviously like background checks and all of the other kind of legal stuff that we need to do. No, not para. We don't need a para protest for subs. Sorry.
Not for a floating sub, no.
No. I know, sorry. I was like going down the para route. So.
Yeah.
Any other comments or questions about the superintendent's report? Okay, let's move on then to the governance process item. And I'm happy to report that Dave Chandler and the superintendent and I interviewed 4 candidates yesterday, half an hour each. We wound up with more impressive candidates than we had seats available. We only had 2 seats according to what we voted on back in June. And there is one thing that we decided wasn't a difficulty, but it's up to the board. Only one of the 4 candidates had actually attended a school in the Taconic and Green in grades 5, 6, 7, or 8. That left 2, at least, well, it left other impressive candidates who didn't technically qualify on account of what we voted back in June, which was that the candidate had to have attended those grades. What we'd like to ask you to do is to eliminate that requirement and to appoint both the one outstanding candidate who did qualify and another one who didn't. And those would be Alexia, look for her last name here. Excuse me, Alexandria, not Alexia.
Lacoste is her last name.
Pardon?
Lacoste.
Right, Lacoste, Alexandria Lacoste and Samantha Stevenson, both BBA students, both juniors.
I move that the requirement that was, you called number 2, which said that a 5th, 6th, 7th, or 8th grade applicant must have attended Taconic and Green School, be eliminated as a requirement, and that both of the proposed candidates be approved.
Thank you, Dick. Is there a second?
Ben.
For a second.
Seconded.
Ben.
Ben. Okay, Ben seconding it. Okay. Is there discussion? Melanie.
I think if we're going to try to have 2 students, I think we should at least shoot to have one of them, which happens to be the circumstance we're in now. But moving forward, I would hate to eliminate that completely. I do think it's important, that there is experience in these schools for this role. So if we can amend it to say that, when there's 2 people, one of them should have had that experience, or however that should be written.
Well, I didn't take Dick's motion as meaning this was going to bind the board forever. I just took it to apply to this instance. Was that your idea, Dick?
Yes.
Other discussion, Jim?
Just a question of if the other 3 candidates didn't go to T&G schools, where did they come to VBA from? Just curious.
One was overseas. He's
Okay.
not a U.S. citizen. One was partly on a boat and partly at. I don't think we know exactly what school.
It was home study.
May have been home study. Well, he was definitely home study on a boat. And the third went through a private school out of state.
Thanks. Just curious.
Any other questions, comments, discussion? All right. Oh, sorry, Jane, yes.
I remember when I was in high school and I went to these meetings as the student body president, but all to say that I think it'd be great if the board hasn't already approached the student councils, the respective student councils in the school to see if they might help elect someone. Because I agree with, I think it was Melanie, I think it's really important to have that public school experience that makes it also meaningful and timely to the kinds of discussions and things that are going on with policies and that sort of thing. So,
Randy, can you remind us, I think the publicity included those schools that had student councils, didn't it?
Sure, I'm happy to share with you the process that we used if you'd like to hear that. I reached out on the 18th of September to the heads of the schools in our area, letting them know that you as a board were looking for student representatives, and that on Monday, the 21st, I would be sending out communication to the schools. They would include surveys for students to self-nominate, as well as for teachers to nominate students. We had a couple of questions on that Friday, and then on Monday we sent them out, and they were open until October 2nd. So, we had students who self-nominated. I followed the guidance that you had from the June meeting. Students were required to answer. I had them answer questions and to have letters of recommendation. And we didn't have a lot of applicants initially. So I had clearly said that applicants needed to have gone to one of our middle schools. We had a couple of students who reached out and said, I didn't meet that criteria. I said, look, why don't you apply, and we'll kind of leave it to the board to determine how they want to handle that, not knowing how many students we'd have, what this situation was that we found ourselves in. So then they closed on the second, and then we conducted interviews. So, we followed the process that you had outlined, and as we look ahead in the future, we may want to tweak or adjust how we approach this, but kind of in short turnaround, from the start of the year, tried to make it work for this year. And students are juniors. We had wanted one junior, one senior. We did not have any senior applicants. So both students are juniors.
Dick.
I think it's important to recognize that part of the description of the job along the line is that they would actively seek opinions and attitudes and feedback from all of our 3 middle schools, and that they were not just sitting on the board, they were supposed to be representing students within the entire system. And so therefore, I know that we talked about in our preliminary discussions on what we would ask, that these students might even ask the kids in Courier and Sunderland as well, because they are a part of our system. And I think David and Herb, as they were reviewing the questions, sort of allowed us how that would be a part of the discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Dick. And indeed it was. At least the top 3 candidates, I'm not sure about the 4th, all realized that was going to be part of their job. Dick, I have one question about your motion. Are these appointments meant to be for 1 year or for 2?
If we had a senior, the senior would graduate. And the impetus, as Melanie was suggesting, is that we would have a senior and a junior. But now that we have 2 juniors, I would be open to a suggestion of appointing them each for 2 years.
Melanie and then Jane.
I would just say, if you haven't asked them that, you should check in with them about that first. I would imagine we don't have seniors applying because senior year is pretty busy.
Well, and David can correct me, or Randy can correct me. I think that the applicants assumed that it was a 2-year, but I'm not absolutely sure about that.
I'm not sure either. I don't think we talked about it. I don't think it was explicitly said.
Yeah,
John,
we didn't discuss it. And in fact, what my impression was that we said something about if you like it, then you can apply again next year. So maybe it would be better just to do it 1-year term and just renew it. If they can reapply, and maybe they're not that interested in doing it for a second year. It's the inaugural thing.
I think Jane's next, and I've lost track of who's next after that.
John.
Okay. I mean, I understand because of the shortness of time, and it sounds like, Randy, you took the feedback and ran with it, did fine. But something I'll just add again, from having actually worked with those kind of things in the high school at the time, I think next time in the future, the board might want to consider reaching out directly to like the student council advisor or the faculty person that works with it, because I believe you'll get some really good candidates that way. And they'll also help get the word out accordingly. And then secondly, I also believe that it's with respect to what kids experience in school. I think asking for a 2-year commitment, I don't think is realistic. A realistic commitment to ask for something like this. I think it works better if you do 1 year. I think it inspires other people, and then if they want to apply, that they stand perhaps in competition, if you will, against someone else.
Let's see, I think Dick changed his motion to be for 1 year. And who seconded the motion? Do you agree with that?
That was Ben.
Yes. Yeah, that's fine with me. Thanks.
And there's more discussion. Who's next? Is it
John Wilson?
John Wilson, thank you.
I'm for 1 year, and I think we should pay them a stipend. I think that they should get the same stipend offer them the same stipend we do. Not only will that get more interest, but I think it's equitable, and it shows that how we value their voice.
Dick, do you want to take that as a friendly amendment, or should that be a separate question?
I would be happy to take it as a friendly amendment.
And I would be glad to second it.
Okay, I just want to jump in for a second. I believe that stipends are determined by the voters. So you can do that, but we may not be able to. So I just want to say that. Let's look into it and see if that's possible. I think it's a great idea.
Then I'd phrase it, if it is possible to offer a stipend of equivalence, we should do so. Otherwise, find the money somewhere else.
And if
as
it's
an
not,
honorarium.
if it's not being offered, if our budget, we're not doing all that spending for the budget item on stipends, if someone here is not taking their stipend, can we use that in the short term?
I think we have to go back and look at the language, Randy, but I think when stipends are set, they're set at a per person amount. And so if we're considering them board members, I don't think it matters how much we put in the budget in total for the line item. I think it more matters that we're paying you each the voted approved amount. And so if they are also considered a board member, I think it might be fine. So we'll look at it.
Yeah, let's just explore it. I just want to put it out there that it may not be quite as easy as you making that decision. So we'll look into it and see what the possibilities are, and whatever we can make.
The idea then is, if it can be a stipend the same as the rest of us get, that's our preference, but if it has to be some other way, then we want you to figure out how to do it. Is that right?
Got it.
Any more discussion? So we now have a motion to appoint for 1 year Alexandria Lacoste and Samantha Stevenson, and to either pay them a stipend or find some way to pay an equivalent. Is that stated correctly?
Fine with me.
Okay.
We don't want to wait until, do we want to put it back out there with the stipend? If create a little buzz? Or I'll go with whatever, but I'm just saying.
I don't think that'd be wise, just because we told them that we probably would be letting them know in 48 hours.
Okay, fair enough.
Any other discussion? All right. all
Yes, I
those-
just want to say that these kids were motivated. They weren't motivated by money. They were motivated by genuine interest. And some of them were, I don't know if they were student council, but one of them had taken AP government, was really jazzed by it. Another one wanted to do education, so they were fascinated by that. So I really think we tapped into some really good people. They came from different directions. So and because they were volunteering, their motives are the motives that we would all applaud. So I'm not saying the money is going to just send it the wrong direction, but I wouldn't want to have to go through the process again just because we think we might get better people. These are really good people.
Yeah, I think it's appropriate to vote on it now. Just one question for everybody, by the way. We are accustomed to referring to each other by first name. Once we seat some student representatives, I think we ought to encourage them to call us by first name also, just to show that except for voting, we're all in the same board. But anybody have any thoughts?
Fine.
Okay, you ready to vote? All those in favor of Dick's motion, could you please raise your hand? And that looks to be unanimous. It is unanimous. Okay, thank you very much. And the second item under governance is the FY20 year-end financials. Oh, and Randy and I will send out an email to the successful candidates probably either tonight or tomorrow. Is that right, Randy?
Yes, it will likely be tomorrow morning.
Okay, year-end financials.
So I'm not going to go through the whole detail of the report, but just a quick summary is that we obviously ended the year in a much better place than we originally anticipated. And the bulk of that is due to COVID. You know, we shut down operations for about a third of the year. So even though we were paying staff and benefits, we did have some savings in staff costs because obviously there was work that couldn't be performed, wages that couldn't be paid because certain work wasn't being done. So we did end the year in a good place, and all of that money per the voters is going into the tax stabilization fund, which is great. It means we have a really healthy fund moving into the next few years. And you know, at this point, I haven't finished anticipated for this year yet, but under the circumstances with the CRF funds being anticipated to cover all of our COVID-related expenses, I think we're setting ourselves up for a good place for the next few years. If we do have those tuition students that move in, it's a nice healthy balance in that fund. So that's a good thing. In answers to Melanie's question earlier, so the summer food program was to cover the summer food service, which would have started in June for the schools that did operate it. So the AOE or the state chose to reimburse any expenses that happened in the month of June that were eligible under what we could submit a grant for. So even though we didn't operate summer food, we were still eligible to apply because we had expenses in June. So we were approved for our June expenses.
Any other questions or comments about the year-end financials? Seeing none.
So can I just make a quick comment, Herb?
Sure.
So just to give you a sense of where we're going over the next few months, which many of you may already know, you know, we wanted to get you FY20 and have you have a sense of where we ended the year. In November, we're going to give you an update on where we stand for FY21. That these two year-end year update obviously kind of paves the way for the beginning of December when we are going to present to you draft of FY22. So just try to keep that context. There's kind of a reason behind the sequence of these three meetings because FY20, FY21 obviously will inform where we're going at FY22, and we're trying to find a path forward, the most stable path that we can using all the information. Okay.
And I think we feel for you not knowing what Congress may do in the meantime. Jim.
Yeah, I just wanted to, this is actually something that was in Randy's superintendent's report, but we didn't talk about specifically, but we got involved VSBA wise on, and I think it's kind of important for everybody to recognize the importance of, you know, we talked about how many fewer students we have this year than we did last year. And, you know, the legislature did ultimately, there was a lot of battles going on and it went back and forth, but they did a couple of things that are going to have a significant impact on us for our budgeting, you know, this coming year. And one is a provision in the big budget bill that that said that your ADM count for the coming year will not be less than your ADM count the prior year. When you're talking about, you know, 94 for, you know, 80, 90, 100 fewer students, that's going to have a huge impact on sort of tax rates and all that. Another item that the legislature did that's very useful in setting the tax rates, they told the Department of Taxes to ignore any deficits from the prior year when setting tax rates for the coming year. So that's, you know, kind of a, gee, we're not going to be, the ed fund is not going to shoulder the deficits that may have been in place for the prior year, and have to make it up in the coming year's tax rate. So it's, you know, I think it's, these are a couple of really important standpoint of giving us a wise our budget and our finances in the coming year. And I think we kind of, you know, ultimately need to you know, be thankful that that's the way it came out in the legislature, because it wasn't clear those things were going to happen. And you know, those are very big from a budgeting standpoint in the coming year. So I think, you know, we recognize that the legislature did actually step up for us in this session in the end.
Thank you, Jim. And of course, we're sort of now into the next agenda item, but Dave, you have a comment?
Yes, I was going to save it for later, but apropos to what Jim just raised, the whole thing about and that Randy had mentioned in her report, the whole legislative thing, we were all talking about how we as a board need to become more active, and we did a resolution in the last meeting. As part of that resolution, we encouraged everybody to reach out to their legislators. So Jim and I both followed our own guidance and did that, and had some amazing experiences. Our legislator, Kathleen James, actually is on the education committee, and she was extremely responsive. I mean, she would reach out to us as she was going into meetings and give us calls or giving us texts and updates. And she was telling us blow by blow about the whole ADM debate and other things. And we thought we were going to lose it. But then other things happened. So it was, I'm not saying that we had much of an influence, but we certainly felt like we had front row seats to watching the movie. So it was a really good experience.
I do think to me, it definitely, because you had Kathleen James on the ed committee going to the ed chair, the House ed chair, and, you know, getting involved with all this. We had the VSBA going in as well. It shows you can have an impact when there's an important issue, and just kind of sitting on your hands and hoping things will work out. You know, I think we as school board members can actually influence the way things happen in Montpelier.
Can I just say, it makes it sound like she's hungry for information, and reminds me that as a board, you know, that kind of immediate feedback and responsiveness is kind of what we're talking about earlier when it comes to communications committee, that, you know, having an approach where we're hungry for information and we're willing to be there to listen, and then also to be responsive, is right where I think we need to be. Without stepping on Randy's toes when it comes to, the nitty gritty.
Well, I think we realize that one of the things about policy governance is it does put on us the responsibility to be more the communicator with the outside world. And I think we're starting to do it, luckily. The next item on the agenda is actually legislative and regulatory action. We've already been there essentially. Does anybody else have anything else that fits under that? Jim.
Sorry, Herb, was that, was that when we were saying, it's time to have updates from, the SBA and all? Was that supposed to be in that section? I don't know.
Well, we didn't really have a section for it, but yeah, I guess that's as close as we have. So go ahead.
Okay, so that was a real key, but in addition, David and I were in touch with them a lot, and I mean the fact that they also beefed up the dollars from the coronavirus relief funds to the schools. One of the areas, a lot of schools are having difficulties with their HVAC systems. As Randy wrote in her report, we think we're in good shape right now, but they actually more than doubled the money going to support schools, up to $13.5 million through Efficiency Vermont to help with HVAC. And in general, that I think Sue did her usual great job of explaining and showing the numbers and all, but it's $88.3 million, put aside to reimburse for COVID-19 costs. And Sue did a good job of kind of saying, direct reimbursement versus repurposed costs. And, the repurposed costs are the ones, those only become at risk if schools put in more than, there is money available, then everybody can get prorated back just for the repurposed costs. But so that, I mean, a lot of positive things happened. So, the session ended well for us. So that's all I had to report, unless there are any questions.
Well, we should all thank you and David for being on the VSBA board.
It's been fun. By the way, I did get reelected at the regional meeting, so you're stuck with me.
Nice.
Oh, and thank you to those of you who attended the regional meeting. I know, Deb? No, Deb's still here. Okay, and Deb has her hand up too. Deb, you'll have to unmute.
No, I attended the meeting too. I found it really useful.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Anything else onto that item? The next item is future agenda items, and I guess this is where I have to give an announcement that I wish I didn't have to. Rachel is moving out of the district, unfortunately, just across the border in Arlington. We discussed whether it makes sense to have the legislature, let Sunderland annex a little bit of Arlington so she could stay in the district, but we decided probably they wouldn't go along with it this year. So as of the December meeting, we will have to have a new board member seated. And I have a question. You'll recall that not long ago, we had 2 candidates for a board seat, and it was one of the 4 extra seats that's assigned to Londonderry, Danby, Manchester, and Dorset. Do we want to go through the process of advertising the seat again, or should we begin by offering it to the person who didn't get it last time? Because that person, if I remember rightly, was from Londonderry.
Is there a legal obligation? I'm sorry, I should raise my hand. Sorry.
Now, John, is there a legal obligation you're asking? I don't think that there's a clear legal obligation, but maybe Randy knows.
I think appropriately, it would be appropriate to advertise the position. Again, if the person from Londonderry chooses to apply, the fact that they were applying for the second time may suggest, because we couldn't make a decision, that person might have a leg up to anybody coming in new, but I think we are obligated to advertise the situation. If it had been one of the 9 specific town related people, we would have advertised it just in that town, because it's a general 4-town possible, or 4-town possible. We got to advertise it in each, I think.
Melanie?
2 questions. One is, Rachel, were you town specific or one of the 4 at large? 4 at large, okay. I mean, if it was 4 at large and that's what we just interviewed was 4 at large, then I don't see as much of an issue of reaching out. Although I do agree with Dick in that I guess it should be advertised, but certainly I don't see why we couldn't email them and say, would you be considered for reapplication? You don't need to write another letter. Just your confirmation and wanting to reapply would be enough. We could pull from what they had.
Regarding that,
That's fair.
Everybody agree with Melanie?
All right, that's fair.
We need to resubmit everything.
Right, they wouldn't need to resubmit, just confirmation that they were interested would be enough for us to pull their previous application, I guess.
Bob, is your hand up, or were you just, Bob Niles, did you want to say something? No, okay. Any other thoughts on that?
Yeah,
Deb?
well, we did at the time say that both candidates were qualified, and it was just the luck of the draw that she didn't get it, but asking her again is a good idea.
Jane?
I agree with what Melanie had said. I think it's important to still announce it, but something that I've been thinking about over the last few meetings with respect to our goals with building equity, and also earlier in the fall when attending the statewide, with the workshop that superintendents and board members can attend. One of the things that was really stressed about helping to build equity in the schools and on the board is to make sure that you have people of color on your board. And I'm thinking, I know it's a hard one maybe to advertise for, but just to possibly think of people that we might reach out to. I think it could be helpful to consider that on our board.
So your idea wouldn't be to actually put anything in an announcement, but if we know somebody, we would encourage them to apply, right? Anybody, any other thoughts on this? Well then, Ben, go ahead.
You got Ben.
I just, I'll be really quick. I know we're over in time, but I just, if in something in the language of the advertisement we put out there that, say the board is really interested in hearing from voices that are not often as participants in is some language around that, and just say that, equity is a major focus of our work. It's one of our primary goals. And that may be a way of sort of boosting the interest out there, and who knows who's reading these things, but I agree with Jane. That would be great to have some more diversity in our board.
Anybody else? Do you have any pleasure about the timing of the solicitation? We don't need to fill the seat, luckily, until the December. Well, we need to fill the seat at our November meeting. The seat doesn't have to be occupied by anybody else but Rachel until December.
You've got the next 2 weeks or 20 days in October for someone to submit. And then if they submit, then we probably would ask that 1, 2, 8, 25 candidates who all want this position step forward and get interviewed. And we might need a special meeting.
Have we interviewed candidates before?
Alex showed up.
I know candidates have come to the meeting, but have we actually interviewed them for votes?
Okay. John?
I think I'm looking at the right state law, the right statute here on vacancies. it says school district operating under, okay, sorry, within 30 days of the creation of the vacancy. And so maybe if we could have that vacancy be created, you know, Rachel will be willing to extend that vacancy until, 30 days from that period. Does that make sense? So we have she doesn't have to leave right. You don't have to leave right now, Rachel, right?
Just leave right now.
No, I'm a resident in Manchester until November 14th.
So I think if Rachel were to resign effective November 14th, that allows us the time we need. But the problem in the past has been we've had people who have resigned on such short notice that we've had trouble with the 30 days. Melanie?
Is there a reason why we wouldn't post it right away?
I know of none. I'm just asking your pleasure on that.
I say go for it.
Okay with everybody? Post it as soon as we can with Ben's suggestion. Okay. We have consensus on that then. Anything else under future agenda items? Celeste, has any public joined us?
I just checked with her that there was no comment on YouTube.
Okay. All right.
But Carolyn, did you have something that you, okay.
All right. So we don't need to reread the norms, but let's take a look at them again because they're the second page of the packet. See if we did okay today. And Melanie?
I just want to jump in real quick. This is just kind of other business. I was asked to share this with the board. It was from a situation we had a couple months ago about a student who was looking to move schools. And the parent asked that I share with the board that they were able to actually switch schools through other processes that are available within our district so that the student is doing great and thriving at the school that they're at. And they thought that they were really appreciative of the sympathy and the empathy of the board, and they wanted to make sure that I share that with you so that you guys all knew that all was well and good.
Right. Anybody noticed any norms that we did not quite follow this time? I can't think of any. All right. Next meeting is November 3rd. And as far as I know, there's only one thing left, which Dick usually supplies.
Move for adjournment.
Thank you. Is there a second?
David Chandler.
Second by David. All those in favor of adjourning, please raise your hand. Anybody opposed to adjourning, raise your hand. Okay, it's 8:50. Apologize for the somewhat long meeting, but we are adjourned.
Thanks, everybody.